Okay, Brandy, over to you.
Great, thanks, Lonnie. Appreciate it. I'm going to give folks just another minute. It's 2 o'clock, but we still have. All right, let's go ahead and get started today. So thank you all for joining the training today. My name is Brandy Donini-Melanson, and I'm a program manager for the Executive Office for U.S. Attorneys, which is the sponsor of today's training. Today's training is on community-based violence intervention, which is also known as CBI. And this session today is going to relate to the management of programs, staff, and relationships. Today's webinar is the final part of a 3-part series on CBI. Throughout the presentation, we ask that participants put their questions in the chat box. We'll take some time at the end of the discussion to answer those questions. During the webinar today, participants will learn about the management of community-based violence intervention programs, in partnerships and relationships with public safety and social service agencies, staffing of programs, including hiring, vetting, and training of staff, qualifications and safety of staff. We'll also hear a little bit about some lessons and successes of success and failure. Although today's presenters will be using a PowerPoint presentation, we did provide you with some resource documents earlier, and then we provided a bio as well. We'll send that information out after the webinar with the recorded link, particularly for those who weren't able to receive it. So we want to thank the Bureau of Justice Assistance and LISC, which is one of the Bureau of Justice Assistance's training and technical assistance providers. They have been an outstanding resource for us, and we're really grateful for their help in helping us secure today's panelists. And today we have with us LeVar Michael with LISC. He'll be moderating the panel discussion with Pastor DeAndre Brown, James Timpson, and Kendra Simmons. Ms. Simmons will be stepping in for Ann Marks. So we're really grateful for our panelists today, and thank you so much for joining. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. We've had a lot of discussion with the field, and this seems to be a really important topic. So I'm going to turn it over to LeVar now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brandy, and good afternoon, everyone. Before we get started, just want to send another big thank you to our friends at the Executive Office of the United States Attorney and our partners at the Bureau of Justice Assistance for really working hard to coordinate these webinar sessions, which we all know are critically important to enhancing the safety and security of our community. So once again, thank you folks for all your hard work. And thank you all for joining today's session on community-based violence intervention, management of programs, and staff relationships. My name is LeVar Michael, Senior Program Officer with the Local Initiatives Support Corporation Safety and Justice Team. For those of you who may not be familiar with LISC, LISC is a nationwide community development finance institution. We have over 35 local offices in jurisdictions across the country. And our goal here at LISC is pretty simple. We work with community partners to develop resilient and inclusive communities of opportunity for the residents who reside in those communities. And it goes without saying, achieving that goal requires us to focus on safety because we know that safety is fundamental to the health and the vitality of the communities that we serve. And because of that, for over 20 years, our LISC Safety and Justice Division has worked hard to support community level, place-based public safety initiatives throughout the country, whether that's through the work we do working with partners in the private foundation world, or if we're talking about the work that we do serving as a national training and technical assistance provider for the Department of Justice. So again, we're happy to be here with you today and really excited to be able to elevate the voices of those who are working tirelessly to strengthen communities through their community-based violence intervention work. It's truly our hope that today we can share valuable information with you that can really help you as you begin the process of exploring ways to get more involved in the CVI programs in your particular jurisdictions. Before we get started today, I will ask everyone to do one main thing, right? To keep in mind just how extremely challenging CVI work can be, right? Whether we're talking about implementing a hospital-based violence prevention program, a cure violence or focused deterrence model, or even some type of other hybrid CVI program, we know that managing programs, building programmatic strategies, recruiting and retaining staff can be challenging endeavors, right? This is not easy work, and it really requires a specified skill set, which really runs the spectrum from organizational management and administration on one hand to community trust building and relationship development on the other hand. So today we have, one of the things we want to do today, we have some amazing people who are going to really help us better understand what those skill sets and what those elements are that you need to have in place to have a very effective CVI program. We've invited 3 prominent leaders in the field of CVI to share best practices and lessons learned around program management and staffing relationships. So quickly, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. First, I'll start with Kendra Simmons, who is the Director of Programs for Youth Alive in Oakland, California. Kendra is a nationally recognized expert in preventing community violence. Kendra serves as a lead trainer for the National Network of Hospital-Based Violence Intervention Programs, providing expertise and technical support to the network and its member agencies. Her interest in mental health has led her to focus on how trauma affects families and communities at large, emphasizing the role that environments play in the spread of community violence. So, Kendra, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Next up, we have Reverend DeAndre Brown Sr. Reverend Brown is the Executive Director of Lifeline to Success in Memphis, Tennessee, and he also serves as the pastor of Lifeline to a Dying World Ministries. Reverend Brown has an intimate knowledge of the challenges and struggles faced by returning citizens, having served in prison himself. During his nearly 2 years in prison, he learned about landscaping and found his Christian faith. And today, Reverend Brown, through his work at Lifeline to Success, ministers to ex-offenders and works to develop reentry support programs. We should also note that recently we learned that Reverend Brown was this year's recipient of the 2021 49th Annual Jefferson Award for the work that he does in Memphis, Tennessee. So Reverend Brown, thank you for taking the time to join us, and congratulations on that award as well. Lastly, we have James Timpson, or JT. JT is the Director of Community Partnership and Safety for Roca, Maryland, and the Roca Impact Institute. JT is the former site director of Safe Streets Park Heights in Baltimore. While serving as director, JT led a staff of 6 outreach workers and violence interrupters in preventing and reducing homicides in Baltimore's Northwest District. Prior to joining Safe Streets, JT worked in the mayor's office of Baltimore City for over 12 years in a number of different capacities, such as assistant director of the mayor's office of Employment Development's Reentry Center. So thank you all for taking the time to join us today. As Brandy mentioned, I think this is going to be a lively discussion. We have a lot of great expertise on this panel today. So before we get started, I wanted to first take a few minutes to allow each of you to describe your CVI program and your CVI work. We know that the field of CVI can be extremely diverse, right? We know that there are a number of different models and a number of different ways that folks climb into this work. We know, for instance, that there are some CVI programs that work very closely with law enforcement, such as focused deterrence. And then we also know that there are some programs that choose not to work closely with law enforcement, such as the cure violence model. So I just feel it could be helpful for folks to just get a better idea of like what your particular CVI programs are and what these models are that you in particular implement in your specific jurisdiction. So Kendra, let's start with you if we can. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Youth Alive and the work that you folks do there?
Yes. Again, I'm Kendra Simmons. I'm the program director at Youth Alive. We have a few programs that do the CVI work. So we have the violence interrupters first, and those are our first responders to our hospital linked work, and also to scenes. So when violence incidents occurs in the community, and they do a lot of mediations in the community, again, as well as responding to violent incidents and doing safety assessments with individuals who've been injured through community violence. And then after that, we also have our Caught in the Crossfire program that actually provides the case management for those who've been injured through community violence. And then we have our Gaddafi Washington Project, which is a homicide response program. And so our program provides the support needed to families of homicide victims. So whether it's help navigating funeral arrangements, ongoing grief support. So all of that, all of those systems that families just have to cope with after a homicide, we have a team that can help families navigate those systems. And then we also have our counseling component, so that when families are still dealing with the trauma, we have in-house counseling, so that they can actually continue to work with clinicians. And our clinicians work differently, like they can do home visits, or they can meet you where you are. So it's really, they do traditional counseling in an untraditional way, so that people are very comfortable taking part in services. So it's not come to an office and let's talk with you, but all of our programs work together. The one thing that we have done to ensure the safety of our staff is that we really have our upper management really continue to have a relationship with our law enforcement. We do have a partnership with our local police department, but to ensure the safety of our staff, so that our staff are not seen as those working with law enforcement, our upper management really hold and maintain that relationship with law enforcement. And then we also have a good relationship with city government in Oakland, California. So our city government, we are really, we have that strong partnership. So they also can serve as a liaison between the police department as well. Oakland, California has a newly developed Department of Violence Prevention. So a lot of violent incidents now are being funneled through that department. So then we are able to, again, have them serve as like a liaison between the local police department, on top of the relationship that we have built, being that we're now going into 30 years of doing this work in Oakland communities.
That is excellent. Thank you so much for that information, Kendra, and very excited to dive deeper into that work and what it looks like as we move forward. JT, let's go to you. Tell us a little bit. So, you know, your experience is a little unique because not only do you have experience working the Cure Violence model, but you also have experience working other models like the ROCA program that you represent now. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your program and the work, the amazing work, I'll say, that you folks do across the country.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is JT. I'm the Director of Community Partnerships and Safety for ROCA Maryland and the ROCA Impact Institute. And really what we do in Baltimore is we focus on a group of young men at the highest risk of being your next victims or perpetrators of gun violence, ages 16 to 24. And we're a behavioral health model, so we really focus on the trauma that these young men have suffered in their past. We base our model off of what the brain science tells us about trauma and what trauma actually does to the brain of these young people. And we have developed our model based on what we've learned about trauma. And so CBT is a huge portion of what we use to help address these young people. And our form of CBT is not cognitive behavioral therapy, it's cognitive behavioral theory. Because we work with Mass General Hospital's Department of Psychiatry with the input of our young people to develop a more mobile tool that could be used by all frontline staff. So you don't have to be a licensed clinician to be able to deliver our CBT. Our CBT was designed specifically that way, to be mobile. Our young people don't feel comfortable going to see therapists. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Until you build a relationship and get them to that point. But again, we truly meet young people where they are. So if that's the case, then we have to take the services to them. So our services, again, are designed to be delivered by frontline staff, designed to be delivered by educational staff, designed to be delivered by anybody who comes in contact with our young people who work for us, are trained in our CBT, and they're able to deal with our young people from that lens. Because we know that trauma is the leading force in what causes our young people to act the way that they act. So a lot of the behaviors that we see, we don't take into consideration the trauma that that young person has been through to cause them to be the way that they are. We only see them as a criminal. And so we have to learn to really address the young people where they are, address that trauma, and really help them build the bandwidth to be able to make better decisions so that they can live a healthier life, or they can live, period, right? What we call CBT is 7 skills. We call them the seven life-saving skills, because they really are skills that help young people make better decisions, that they can live another day, and they can do something different. We believe that change is possible. And, you know, one thing that our 2 basic outcomes are sustainable employment and a reducing recidivism, right? But also in our program, built in our program, is relapse, because we expect, if we are dealing truly with the highest risk young people that we say we're dealing with, if they can show up every day and they can do all the things that we ask them, then we're dealing with the wrong group of young people. We're not dealing with high risk, because they can't show up every day, because they just don't have the bandwidth to do it right now, right? And we have to help them get there. So again, we are very clear who we work with, and we don't want to bloom a million flowers, because there are other programs out there that do other great things. We choose to let them do those other great things, and we choose to really focus on who we say we serve. And so I think one of the most important things around who we serve is the misconception about, you know, how we work with law enforcement. And I know we'll get into it a little bit later, but as Kendra mentioned a little bit, the relationship has to be there, whether it be through high-level staff, whether it be through, you know, whoever you decide that relationship is appropriate for. But if you tell me that you have no relationship with your law enforcement, I have to really question your commitment to this work, because they have more contact with our young people than anybody else. So if you're not working with them, then how are you really serving our young people, right? Because we have 4 pillars, right? The 4 pillars of our program are really the transformational relationships, or the relentless outreach and follow-up. So we're relentless as hell when we go after these young people. In Baltimore, it takes us about 18 to 20 door knocks before we make contact with a young person. But guess what we're doing on those 18 door knocks? We're talking to family. We're building a relationship with mama, grandmama. We're building a relationship with whoever's answering that door those 18 times we come. And most of the time, by the 12th or 13th time, they like, God dang it, why do you keep knocking on my door? And I'm saying, because I really care about your young person, but you don't know him. You're right, I don't know him, but I love him anyway, and I care enough about him to keep coming back, right? And so by the time we hit that 18th knock, that door is open, because mama done seen us enough, grandmama done seen us enough, where they like, hey, come on, you know, and then they wind up assisting us with finding these young people, right? When I will be honest, when I first heard about this piece of the model in Baltimore, I said, oh, heck no, you must be crazy. Hey, well, it's not going to work. We going and knocking on people's doors and they don't know who we are. You out your mind? Nah. But it has truly been the one piece that has gotten us as far as we've gotten, because it showed the relentless nature and that we really do care. And that's one piece. And then it's really about the educational support that we can provide with young people through helping them with GED services, life skills, whatever it is that they need. And I say that honestly, because our program, yes, we have design workshops and design skills and things like that, but we've really designed things based on what young people's needs are. Because how am I truly servicing a young person if they have a need that I can't meet? I'm not going to say I'm perfect with it, but I need to be able to provide a resource, or I need to be able to provide something that addresses that need. I can't just say, oh, we don't do that and walk away, because that's not really servicing the young person. And so we really, you know, help develop our programming based on what the young people's needs are. That involves talking to them and having sessions with them about really challenging things. Why you keep putting your hands on that young lady? You know, why do you keep making babies with all these different young ladies out here and not taking the responsibility of taking care of them? Right? Now, we understand those are things that are embedded in their trauma. But if we don't challenge them and have conversations with them about those specific things, how do we expect them to ever get better? Because we can ostracize and criticize people for, we are so good at that, criticizing all day long, but how good at we are really offering solutions about what we criticize, right? So we really focus on that. We have a social enterprise where we send young people out to work every day, and we pay a minimum wage, and they, real work for real pay. And the goal of the work program is not about the work. It's a practice ground for them to practice their behavior change. Because we expect them to blow up. We expect them to curse their supervisor out. We expect them to be late. We expect them not to be in uniform. We expect all these things to happen. But if we don't give them a practice ground to practice these things and just send them to an employer when they're not ready for work, guess what happens? The door gets slammed in their face and they're re-traumatized. And we don't take any of that into consideration. So let's give them a practice ground where we can allow them to practice the skill of what going to work and what being ready for work really looks like. So that's part of it. The last piece I'll say is our engaged institutions. If we want to hold young people accountable, how dare we not hold the systems accountable who service these young people? Because the reality of it is that a lot of our systems have been designed to victimize our young people more so than they have been designed to help them. So we have to help them understand what that looks like and why that's important. I'm sorry, you said you were getting ready to say something.
No, go right. We'll dive in deeper. That's why I said I knew this was going to be a dive in.
Yeah. So that's the fourth pillar. I was getting ready to stop there anyway, but that's where law enforcement falls in. That's where our criminal justice system falls in. They all fall into that bucket because it's not only the young person's responsibility to learn how to work with the system. It's the system's responsibility to learn how to service our young people in a way that maximizes the potential, maximizes what we hope to get. You can't put a young person on probation and make it so unrealistic that there's no way they can possibly complete it without violating, right? And you have to help them understand that that's not helpful for our young people. It's more traumatizing. And we're not saying that the system should not hold them accountable, but let's make it equitable so that our young people are getting something out of that system as well. So, that's kind of where our focus is and the approach that we take to the work. It's about holding our young people accountable, but also systems as well.
And that's so critically important because, we know even when it comes to the service side, right? There are so many service providers out there, not all, but some, who, are in it for all the wrong reasons, right? It's all, sometimes I think, some of these service providers see a dollar sign on the foreheads of some of these young people instead of really looking at ways, how can we get these folks, how can we transform their lives and get them out of the system, right? So I'm so happy that you mentioned that. Reverend Brown, I'm going to throw it over to you. Tell us a little bit about Lifeline and some of the amazing work that you folks do in Memphis.
Awesome. Thank you guys for allowing me to share today. I have to make one correction. As of last Monday, the Shelby County Mayor has appointed me to be the acting director of the Office of Reentry. So while I am still connected to Lifeline Success, my title has shifted, but the work didn't change. So at Lifeline, our mission is to change the perception of what it is to be a convicted felon, and we had to do that in public because you cannot change perception in a vacuum. We kind of backed ourselves into the violence reduction. It wasn't intentional, but it was a need in our community. The only requirement or qualification for our program is a felony conviction. Our target population are multiple offenders, the ones with multiple offenses and those that are violent. We want people that are actively committing crime to join our program. The way we change them is we give them class every day. We do use cognitive behavior therapy. We have training from 9 till about 11:30 every morning, but then everyone on our team work with us. We have contracts with the city and the county to go out and mow overgrown lots. By doing the mitigation of the overgrown lots, it put us in the neighborhoods and people got to see us in public before the work with the violence reduction began. So when people would see our green shirts, they knew who we were, they knew what we represented, and they saw the work that we did. We found the need and we began to meet the need. That got us buy-in from the community. People would call us, ask us to do volunteer work because that's one of the tenets of our program. So we would voluntarily mow overgrown lots. Fast forward to the violence getting out of hand in our neighborhood, we decided, because no one was really responding to that we would be the first responders. As we are with the Blight, we will be the first responders to violence. and we would go to murder scenes, and we would have a block party right there the next day if children saw it. The media would come, the police would come, the U.S. Attorney's Office, everyone involved would show up. Not a vigil, but we had to prove to the community that what was abnormal had to become normal. It was abnormal for the people in the neighborhood to have a good time in public without fearing violence. It was abnormal for children to have a bounce house and barbecue and music and feel safe. So we had to make that normal in the space where it seemed that violence had become the norm. So we intentionally countered that narrative by going to the scene. Not afraid, we didn't call police. The police did show up, but they came because we have relationships with them and the population that we serve. And how we actually bring it to fruition is the men and women are trained every day on how to become positive, productive citizens. Their job is to then be the ambassadors to go out into the community. Our CV, our violence interruption is extremely loose. We don't have the acronyms. We don't have the formalized model. We're in the process now of working with a group that was recently formed in Memphis called Memphis Allies. We've traveled the nation from coast to coast in the last few months, gathering information to find out what are best practices in this work, and we're going to formalize it and professionalize it in a way that's intentional. Even though we were loosely organized in 2016, we had a 50% murder reduction in our police precinct that we're housed in. Went from 38 murders that year to 19, and we were ready to move it down further, but then our funding from the city got cut. And it was difficult for us to do it because it was voluntary work in the first place. It wasn't like it's a program that's funded and we have clinicians and all those people on staff. It's a group of felons working together that have changed their lives going into the community because in most cases they knew the perpetrator, they knew the victim. And it was easy for us to be in the neighborhood because they knew who we were. One of the successful things that we've been able to do is since the people know us, we already have buy-in because we've been meeting needs. So when we go into the community, we're taking an approach that we're not going to target the offender so much as the community's culture. Because I'm a former felon. I'm a felon. I've been to prison. I used to shoot at people. People that commit crime don't want witnesses. When the community says we're no longer going to tolerate it because it's become tolerated in so many neighborhoods, the criminals move. They leave that neighborhood and go to an area where they can thrive. So what we do is we come outside, turn our lights on at night. Go to the mailbox when children are coming home from school. We're not hiding in our homes anymore. We're coming out and we're shifting the culture. Because once we get the culture shifted, violence goes away because people realize that it's no longer going to be tolerated. So our model is more geared towards changing the culture, shifting the dynamic, and then any individual that has been involved in the justice system has the opportunity to come to our program and then get all of those services because after 11:30, they go to work. And they get paid now a minimum of $11 an hour. And when you consider the fact that most of our young men that are out in the streets like that don't have a source of income, in the 90s, when I was kind of out there, people were in the street to make money. Now they're in the street to get bodies. And there's no money in getting bodies. So what we do is give them a reason to no longer need the body, give them something to attach themselves to, give them a color that represents them, give them a name that they can be proud of, and then put them on television. The media comes to all of our events. They can be seen as a positive, productive citizen. So even when they're with law enforcement, the community knows they ain't the police because they know who they are. They know what we do. And they afford us the opportunity to come into the neighborhoods and thrive because eventually they're going to need some more grass cut.
That's great. And Reverend Brown, so let's throw you the first question. You spoke about the ambassadors, right, that go out and do a lot of the work in the community. One of the reasons why all of the folks on the panel today are here is because you folks all have so much experience in understanding how to manage and supervise these type of programs, right? Part of that is the folks that come in to work for you, right? So what are some of the characteristics that you look for in potential employees when you're thinking about having someone come in and work in your organization? What are you looking for in those type of individuals?
So it's twofold. We have the participants in the program that are the actual ambassadors that go out to the neighborhood. They're not formalized. They just know that if they see something going the wrong way, it is their duty to use the value of their relationship to calm it down. In most cases, if you have a person with reason and a person that's losing their cool, if they have a relationship, the reasonable person can win out. But the person that's losing their cool generally runs to those other hotheads that want to help them in that situation. And we only promote from within. So the men and women that come into the program, some of them, we don't age out. You can be with us as long as you need to. Lifeline's 11 years old. Our longest member has been with us for 10 years. She is 66 years old. We don't have an age limit. We don't have gender bias. We choose. We bring anyone in that wants to be. And the benefit of having the older generation in is they can mentor the younger people and help them when they have those crisis moments. So when it comes to our office staff, it's only since I've gone now, it's only a staff of 3. That was 4 when I was there. My wife, she's running the organization now. We have 2 administrative ladies that do case management. They set doctor's appointments. They make sure they get to probation on time, make sure we have the resources we need to do the work. But the management of all of that falls directly on the men and women in the program. It's difficult. Finding the right people is paramount. You have to find the right people. And when you understand the population, you know that it's very difficult to find the right people because part of the MO is to be manipulative and to try to game the system. So the benefit for me is, since I've been in that, I can pretty much see through a lot of it on the front end. For a person that hasn't been in it, it's a little more arduous. And I'm sure there's some best practices that other people can share. I just don't have those because, again, a lot of times you can see it in a person and know, yes, this person is going the right way. Because even though they're doing all the things you want them to do when they're with you, when they go home, there's a whole different ballgame. A benefit to that, though, is having a relationship with other people in the community that respect you enough to tell you when they see your folks doing wrong. We get that all the time. If one of our guys is out in the street doing something he shouldn't do, we'll get a phone call. I'll get a phone call. Somebody come by, Mr. Brown, you know your folks over here on the other side of the street doing something they ain't got no business. And then it's my job to respond to that. So having those community relationships are extremely important. Again, our model is more community-based than for the individual. So we really don't have the close ties to those that have committed the offenses. It's more a broader, and people know we're a resource. Our doors are always open. We have someone that lives in our building. So if the guys at 2 o'clock in the morning are getting in a situation where they need to be safe, they can always come. We call it home. They can come to the Bat Cave. Having a place to be found. So, but the most important part of this work is finding the right people to do their work.
That's wonderful. And it's good to hear that, I mean, like we said from the outset, all programs are different, right? All these models are different. And it's interesting to hear that, you work on instinct, based on your experience. So JT, let's go to the next question to you. We know that there are some CVI programs which rely heavily on hiring of staff with lived experience, right? And we know that there's a reason for that. But we also know there's a role for folks without lived experience to play, right, in implementing some of these programs. So as it relates to staffing and the type of staff that you need to hire for intensive violence interruption work, could you explain why it's so critically important to hire people that have lived experience versus people who aren't familiar with street life? And then conversely, can you explain why it's also important to also have staff who may not have lived experience, but who have the ability to relate to the individuals in these programs?
Yeah, everybody living and breathing has some type of lived experience, right? So it's about defining what you're looking for in that individual. Because the reality of it is, the way that we used to think about what a credible messenger is, in my opinion, has been flawed. Because what it said was that you can only be a criminal, or you can only have had a criminal past, or shot and killed people and been to jail and all this type of stuff to affect change on your community. And I completely disagree with that, right? I think that a credible messenger is one who's viewed as a credible person in that community, right? Who can talk to people, has relationships with people, can build certain levels of trust with people, can help work through issues with people. That's what credibility is, right? Because I know many pastors who are credible, and I know a lot who are very uncredible. You know what I mean? But to the outside world, if you put a clergy next to a person who you say was a former or something like that, then they're going to automatically think that the clergy is the credible one, right? But nah, my experience has been sometimes they worse than the person who you who you demonizing as bad, right? And then you have some who aren't, right? So it's the same thing. You have some guys who are considered credible, but are they really? Because I question, this is my question to guys. Tell me how you think you're really credible if you plan to fit. You got 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and you still causing the harm and death of people. How do you consider yourself credible? Because you can get Yo over there to put the gun down, but you also go tell Yo over there to pick it up and go do your dirty work for you on the back end. Like, that's not credibility, bro. That's just not what it looked like, right? Credibility is really being able to go into a community, build the relationships that are necessary to be able to help affect change. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter your gender, your race, your anything, right? And if you can build that, if you can do that, then you can become credible. Now, hear me clearly. It's not for everybody. So don't get me wrong. I'm not just saying you should just up and go into a community and think you're going to build relationships. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that your lived experience will allow you to be able to figure out where you belong in this work, right? And if my lived experience is from the same communities that the guys that I work with come from, the difference is I played sports, I had an outlet, I didn't make I didn't make all the same decisions that they made, and a lot of stuff I never got caught for. It's the reality of it, right? But my lived experience is not diminished because I've never been to jail or I never shot or killed anybody or had plenty of friends that done all that. But that's not a bragging right. That's not a calling card. That's not what we want these young people to idolize. What we want them to idolize is the change. Now, what that change looks like is what's more important. Because if you tell me your story is what gets you in the door, I have no problem with that. But if you base your work off of your story, you got to come correct, bro. Because the work is not your story. The work is the work. Your story may have gotten you in the door, but that's about it. Leave your story at the door and let's hit the ground and do the work. Because that's what it's about. Here's the reality. The young people nowadays, they don't give a damn about your story. Because they struggling, they starving, they trying to survive. So guess what? Your story may get your head blown off these days as opposed to saving you. So you got to be really careful with how you present yourself to these young people. Because they're looking for somebody who's really going to offer them an opportunity for change and an opportunity for something different. And so I was having a conversation just last week with somebody and they said, well, we need more people like this on the board and you know, all this. So all the board members in the room, I stopped and I said to them, this is your opportunity to go be a credible messenger in your lane. You got credibility with all the people who do the same thing you do, right? So go talk to them about participating or how they participate in the work. Credibility falls in different levels. You got people who are credible on the street. You got people credible in the boardroom. You got people credible in corporate America. Like, credibility is everywhere. It's how you use it to affect the work that is what really makes a difference. And what I'm so sick and tired of is people pulling guys off the streets and throwing them back in the jungle without preparing them for the war. Because you're not helping them become credible. So if you don't train your staff, if you don't professionalize your staff to a degree, then you are doing immense harm to them by throwing them back in the jungle and expecting them to affect change. Because it's like almost putting an alcoholic right back in the liquor store to work behind the counter without sending them to no rehab and no treatment. Right? So we have to understand that. You have to train your staff, professionalize them, and help them understand the importance of their role in this work. Not only that, you have to support the hell out of them because they're on their own journey and they have their own trauma and their own struggles. And if you're not willing to work with them through that, if they're coming to the table honestly, then again, you're doing a disservice to your community. You have to be able, and you know what, like this is, if you could tell, this really a pet peeve for me because my best friend got murdered January 17th, and he was probably one of the most credible people in my city. So you can't talk to me about credibility. You know, he was one of the most credible people in my city and got murdered. So understanding that, it really woke me up and it lit a fire under my ass to really understand what this really looks like and the message that I need to be spreading and sending forward to people.
Yeah.
You know, so
no, good. No,
yeah,
that's
so just understanding it from that lens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know exactly who you're talking about. You know, I'm here in Baltimore as well. And that was a tragic situation that occurred. And thank you so much for that perspective, because I think people really need to hear that, right? And that's such a good segue into our next question. And Kendra, I'll pose this question to you. And if there are other people who want to jump in and answer it, feel free to. But that's such a good point, right? It's about training and professional development. So, you know, as it relates to your specific staff, Kendra, when it comes to training and professional development, what does your organization do to ensure, one, that your staff are safe in the work that they do, right? Because one of the folks that JT just mentioned was actually a worker who was out, you know, interrupting violence on an everyday basis, and unfortunately, you know, ended up getting killed himself in the street, right? So we know this is dangerous work. What does your organization do to ensure that safety? And then also, what do your organizations do to make sure that folks are up to speed on the most innovative approaches to CVI work, right? So I'll pose that to you, Kendra.
Yeah, first of all, I would have to say we listen to the staff that are out there doing this work. As I am the program director, and our violence interrupters, those are the ones who are out there really in the thick of it. I mean, they're responding to the scenes. And if they have, you know, things going on, they are the ones who are in tune with the streets. They know what's going on. So if they say something is not safe, it's not okay. This is your job. This is part of the work. You have to get out there and still do A, B, and C. If they say it's not safe, we have to trust that and understand, because again, what JT just said, like that, I think that example that he gave about really talking and hearing staff, you can't put someone right back into their same environment and expect for them to just have all of the pieces. So when they say something isn't safe, we have to listen to that and then hear their perspective on what it would take for them to move to a level of safety. Because again, they know this environment. They stay in tune with what's going on. They have their ears to the street. So if they're saying something isn't safe, we got to hear it and then hear what they say the needs are to help them move to a place of safety. And then we have to look at the reality. People who are doing this work, there are certain aspects of their job that are never going to make them feel safe. And we have to actually understand that and know that. So if something, and we have like a violence interrupter, intervention specialists, those who are out there who say they don't feel safe, it takes a lot to get to that point to voice that. So you really have to hear that, because again, this is the work that they do every day. So a lot of times they don't even voice those things that do make them feel unsafe. So when it is said, you really have to go there and really dig deeper and really talk about that. And then again, hear what it is, and then hear what they say is going to take to make those, you know, to make whatever it is doing feel safe. So if that means, okay, we need to pull back, we can't be in this situation anymore, this may be out of our control, you know, this may be something you all have to step in and deal with and do something else about it, but we got to be hands off, and we have to respect that. We can't force people to be in unsafe situations. You just can't do that, because then that's like, again, putting an alcoholic behind the counter with, you know, amongst a bunch of alcohol, and you expect them to make the right decisions. It's not going to happen. So you can't do that. So again, we have to listen. And then in terms of continuing and keeping with the trends, we continue to have meetings, and we're looking at national trends and really providing this information to our violence interrupters, to everybody who is actually working on the front line, so that they have this information as well, because they are doing this work. Part of one thing that I do is I look at national trends. I look at the local trends. And I mean, we're looking at ages, we're looking at demographics, we're looking at everything, so that they have what they need, so that they're not walking into situations blind, that they're not walking into any community of the surrounding communities of Oakland where they're not blind in these areas, so that they have what they need. And then again, in regard of trainings, because trauma does impact everyone differently, so that those on the front line have been trained in like mental health first aid, so that they're not spinning their wheels trying to help someone that may be having some type of mental health break and they can't even figure out what's going on. So we provide them with those trainings so that they can have a better understanding as well on how to interact with individuals who may be struggling with mental health disorders. So it's not like they have to only rely on lived experience, because they bring so much more to the table than just lived experience. I think that when you talk about, when you say someone has lived experience, it's like, that's great. But I think what just pointed out, again, that gets you through the door. You got to have more than that. You have to bring more than that. And you have to want to continue to expand on your skill set, because that's eventually is what's going to bring the change in the community. So understanding what trauma does, understanding how that impacts people and their behavior, those are the type of tools that we want to make sure that those who are constantly interacting with people while they continue to work through their own traumas that may have brought them through the door, that they have those resources. So we continue to make sure that they have all that. I mean, it's like they need to continue to increase their skill set as the community continues to change with the trends in violence. So we can't continue to have them working on one platform because this is what the trends of violence were in 2020, because we're in 21 now. So things have changed. So we have to constantly keep changing and make sure that they understand what's happening with these trends, how mental health, how the community, how everything is impacting those changes in the community, so that they can be effective in their work.
Yeah, that's great. And, you know, one of the things that you guys continue to talk about over and over and over again, I think everyone touched on, is trauma, right? And I think that should be something that folks really take away from today's conversation, right? A big takeaway is really focusing on the trauma that we experience in a lot of these communities that we work in, right? Because I think when people from the outside look in and they see what happens in some of these communities, I don't think they take into consideration, you know, why a lot of this stuff is happening. It's because of generational trauma. And that's a conversation for another time. But thank you all for pointing that out. Kendra, real quick, before I go to Reverend Brown for the next question, I want to ask you, you know, just to sort of change gears a little bit, when we discuss CVI programs, many of us typically think of adults, right? I think a lot of folks automatically think of adults as violence interrupters or what have you. We generally overlook the importance of youth and the role that they can play in violence prevention. What advice would you have for other CVI initiatives that may be out there that primarily do a lot of work with adults, but want to try to do some work with youth as well? Because we know you folks at Youth Alive do amazing work with youth. What advice would you have for some of those folks?
So at Youth Alive, we have our Teens on Target program, and our youth do a lot of advocacy work, and they also do a lot of work in learning workshops around the cycle of violence and preventing violence, so that they can train and teach these to younger students. So they are in high schools, they learn the curriculum, and then they go into middle schools. Now, with our violence interrupters, they have also looked at having youth ambassadors, so not necessarily having them directly involved in terms of the violence interruption work. And part of that has been just because of how fast things travel on social media. And one thing that we have learned is that youth do not do a lot of fact checking before they start spreading things on social media. So we have always been real careful not to put any of our young people at risk. But again, they can work alongside violence interrupters and show up and be really active with violence interrupters at events, and you know, and really be proactive in that way. But again, it's really just I know in Oakland and also in around the country, social media has really been big, just in terms of how people interact and engage in each other, in terms of how they call each other out in terms of violence, and with different gangs and cliques calling each other out on social media. And we've had situations where we see people put young people out there on social media like a snitch or things like that, because they've, you know, they've been talking and really weren't snitches, but because again, young people don't do fact checking. They just hear something and again, they put it on social media. So we've been very careful about not wanting to have any of our young people get caught up in that way. So again, having them out with violence interrupters, who are people who are credible, they're out there showing up in the community, everybody knows them. So having young people work alongside with violence interrupters, then that's the way that young people can be seen as a positive, you know, as that positive force in the community, working alongside violence interrupters. And that way, you know, it's a way to also keep them safe, because that's where we're always trying to look at how how that plays out, because specifically in Oakland, we have a lot of youth that are driving violence. But again, we just don't want the wrong message to get put out about any young person.
Mm-hmm. Good to know. Good to know. Reverend Brown, so, you know, and you sort of hit on this earlier, but I want to just sort of circle back to it for a second. You know, when thinking about developing your specific CVI program, one of the things that you chose to do is combine workforce development, you know, a workforce development skill setting with your violence intervention work, right? And I think that's so critically important to have those two different components, right? I want you to talk about why that's important to not only be out there in the community disrupting violence, but also providing skills. And then also, one of the things your program does that I think gets left behind a lot is you're focused on blight reduction, right? You're focused on looking at the physical environment of the community and figuring out ways to make those communities look and feel better for the communities, for the residents who live there. We talk about trauma, right? And a lot of times I think we overlook the fact that the conditions of the community itself, right, causes trauma for folks. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. One of the things that we've been blessed to be able to do is to change the way a community looks. When we started the Blight Patrol 10 years ago, Memphis was a mess. We were one of the victims of the Wells Fargo predatory lending, so much so that the city of Memphis won a lawsuit against them and implemented money to doing the blight remediation. One of the things that it does for our men and women, though, is it gives them a sense of pride. We would go out, when we first started, we were volunteering, and we wouldn't charge the city for any money. And people would come out because the grass would be 7, 8 feet tall. You couldn't see a house. You couldn't be trees in the yard, and we clear it like a person lived there. People would sit outside on their porches. They'd bring their lawn chairs out. They would clap. Our men and women began to be heroes because they cleaned up the neighborhood. So then when we saw this violence beginning to take a tremendous uptick, we started being the ones that responded to it. They already saw us as an asset. So when we said we want to go out and stop this, they began to follow suit. See, in the criminal culture and crime, there's a culture of crime, the subculture that runs pervasive in our underserved neighborhoods. And the culture of crime says your expected response is violence. So that means anybody can become a shooter. It just takes you being in the right moment with the right opportunity and the right set of circumstances, and you will shoot somebody because you don't want to be seen as a punk. So when you understand that, you have to ask yourself one question. Why would a person in the environment that's not leaving the environment want to work for us and help us solve this problem? What is it about them that makes them want to be different now? Because they immediately know they'll be seen as different. But when you give them a sense of pride, something else, when you give them a way of seeing the world that's not normal and you give them some hope, then they want to see other people sharing that same hope they have. While it's ours, again, it's formalized, but relationships matter. And when you have relationships, you talked about safety a lot. Your friends, the people that you're associated with, can be your best assets. But in this criminal culture, they can also be the most dangerous. So you have to be mindful of all of those things. But when we use that, we're place-based, meaning that our neighborhood is where we focus. And the men and women know each other. I don't tell my men and women, this is going to sound strange, I don't tell them to get out of the gang. I tell them to stop doing what gang members do. Because there may be a time I need their relationship to help us bring some fruit. Because if they're still affiliated but not doing the stupid stuff, the people in the community know, the gang leaders know me. They know what I'm attempting to do. They have respect for me enough to allow me to have their men, because they're boys and men as well, and then we can go out because they're going to need some grass cut. I'll give you an example, and I'm going to stop talking. There was a time in our neighborhood we were cutting grass across the street from a corner store, and it was on one of the places where one of our local gangs hangs out, and we had to go behind a house to cut the grass. And when we went behind the house, guys came running out the back with guns. I mean, big guns, too. And when they realized it was us, they stopped running. But they did take the guns in the store, and they came out of the store without guns. They didn't bother our folks. We didn't bother them because they know who we are. We know who each other are. Well, it's one of those situations where when you have that level of credibility, and then you see a situation that's getting out of hand, remember one thing, we will never end violence. So the mission shouldn't be to end it. It should be to drastically reduce it. Because if you're putting a program together that's going to end violence, you're always going to be disappointed. But if you set you some benchmarks on how much you can reduce it and then work towards that with everything you have, you take into consideration on the front end that there's some folks you just can't save. There's some people that are just going to go against the grain because they are hell-bent on doing what is the wrong thing to do. We must take that into consideration and not consider that a failure. If we really plan the right way and we take into consideration that there's some we can't save, it'll help us, because if you don't take that into consideration on the front end, every one you lose, you'll feel like you failed, and it will discount the amount of success you've had with those that you've been able to turn around.
Thank you for that. So I want to pivot for a second, and there are a lot of questions being populated in the chat. So I want to go over there and ask some questions real quick, and then we'll come back because I want to talk about staff vetting, right? How do you vet your staff? I want to hit on that as well. But first, I want to just go to one of the questions that was populated in the chat. What challenges are your agencies dealing with during the pandemic? I think that's a good question. You know, over the last year or so, it's been challenging for all of us, right? In many different forms and fashions. And anyone can jump in on that. What are some challenges that you folks have noticed?
I can give you a quick answer. Ours really didn't suffer much. Since the work we do is considered essential, we didn't miss a day of work. So we've been blowing and going pretty much as normal.
And in Oakland, I would say initially we experienced some challenges because a lot of our work, it is in the community, but again, with Oakland being in Alameda County, which has some of the highest COVID rates, our staff experienced a hard time, just really their fears around COVID. So that was, you know, we really had to educate the staff about COVID and how to protect themselves. And then also our hospitals stopped allowing staff to come in for a period of time. So we had to get clearance from the hospitals and really had to, again, learn the education about COVID and then get the clearance to go back into the hospitals. But again, that was short-lived. We probably were out of the hospitals for maybe about 6 weeks. But then after that, our violence interrupters were back in the community. And then also our case managers were not doing in-person contact for some time. And so that it really impacted how relationships were built, because that's something that has to happen in person. So even the case of our intervention specialists, they noticed we need to be back out there. We need to be in people's faces. So, you know, we switched that, and everybody was on, you know, they were in agreement to that. But on top of that, in terms of people getting injured, those numbers just went up. It was really sad. It was hard, and that was something that was hard for our staff, just to see how many people just were getting shot in a short period of time. Our homicide rates skyrocketed, shooting rates skyrocketed, everything just went up. So everybody really was working double time, but still wanted to make sure that we did provide services in the community.
Yeah, and the same for us. I mean, we never stopped. Like, we had to be out there. Number one, again, because we understand the population that we serve. So, you know, we felt like if we stopped servicing our young people, then we're putting them more at harm's risk, because they're not watching Dr. Fauci. They don't care about what the Surgeon General was saying. They out there on the corner. So if they don't get the information if they're not getting the information about COVID through those channels, how are they getting it? Because everybody else is already scared to go in those neighborhoods. So they damn sure not going in. Now they got an excuse not to. So we've had to arm ourselves with all the information we could and play health workers and get out there and really try to educate our young people around COVID, educate them around, you know, how it affects the second and third generations. And we got multi-generational households. Most of them got hereditary diseases and high blood pressure and diabetes and all these different things in our communities. We know our people are generally unhealthy in these impoverished communities. So we had to really help our young people understand, like, boy, you keep staying out here and you going in the house with your grandmother, bro. You're going to be responsible for her taking that last breath, boy. You don't want to do that. You know what I mean? Like, you know, what can we do different? How can we help you? But I say this, if we as a country responded to violence like we did this pandemic, we wouldn't even be having this conversation today. But the reality of it is that we have not learned how to violence is the longest pandemic ever in history. We still don't call it that. We still just call it violence. Oh, no, America's getting more violent. Oh, no, it's been around for ages. If we figured out how to respond to violence the way that we figured out really fast how to respond to COVID, then we'd be in a much better place. And that's the equity lens that I'm talking about when I talk about these different things, because we don't give the same equity to these type of issues, even though we say we do, right? And people, if people aren't uncomfortable and not getting pissed off by what you're telling them, you're probably not telling them something right, because they like to hide behind all these cliches and all these pretty easy, comfortable conversations. What our young people experience is not comfortable. It's not easy. It shouldn't feel good. I shouldn't be going to work, coming home with a smile on my face, skipping down the street, coming from where I came from and seeing who I saw and experiencing what we've experienced. What it should do is really give me more drive and resolve to make this change, to change it, to make something different happen, right? Like, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that there's no joy in the work, because the joy and the satisfaction come from what you're able to do for young people, right? And what success looks like. And it's not this big grand thing that everybody wants it to be. Success is not a young person coming from jail, staying clean the rest of his life, and getting a $500,000 job. Success is shorty who got out of bed today that didn't get out of bed yesterday. That's success, right? And you could put whatever type of barometer on it that you want to, but I'm telling you that that's success, because I know shorty wouldn't have got up had we not been working with him, right? Shorty didn't pull that trigger today. That's success. He walked through the door of the office today on his own, and I ain't had to run him down in the track to catch him. That's success, right? It's all these little things that we define as being successful. But at the end of the day, the pandemic just gave us the opportunity to really be able to work with these young people in a still place in some instances. In other instances, it causes them to scatter a little bit more. And like Kendra said, we did experience a very high level of death. We had a lot of our young people get killed during this pandemic, unfortunately. I mean, a lot. No, it's just completely abnormal. You know, and I think the Reverend said it earlier. Like, we really have to start addressing the abnormal behaviors that people normalize, because that's what continues to make our communities unhealthy, is that we've been conditioned to normalize abnormal behaviors. So with this pandemic, we had to really help bring some rationale into the conversation, because again, the first thing we heard is Black people can't get it, right? You know, that was an early one, right? Black people can't get COVID. Well, more Black people dying of COVID probably than anybody else. So it's really helping them understand, like we really got to bring the information to them, and we can't be scared to go where they are. And we really got to help them understand all these different things in the way that we will understand it. Because I know I can go to a clinic and get a pamphlet on COVID and get COVID tested and all this type of stuff. Well, they don't want to go to those places. They're not comfortable going to those places, because when they walk through the door, people are already looking at them with a side eye. So how do we make it accessible? So we talk about the challenges of COVID and this, that, and the third, but have we really understood that when COVID hit, did the systems really change to make it easier for our young people to access services? I got young people now who still are waiting for their Social Security card from a year ago. But how do we expect them to go get a job? Because we tell them they got to have a birth certificate, they got to have a Social Security card, they got to have, well, when the pandemic happened, the government shut down. Did the government put provisions in place for those things to be overlooked or skipped so that people can access employment? No. They just say, oh, sorry, you got to wait. Sorry, we backed up. Oh, sorry, the mail system is a year behind. Oh, sorry, all these different excuses, but we expect people to change. Are we really giving them a fair opportunity or fair chance? So that's been the real challenge of COVID, is it's created more inequity where there already has been inequity.
Yes. Yeah, we hear that time and time again as well, the challenge with COVID. Oh, man, great conversation. Real quick, let me go to another question, because we're getting some really good questions in the chat, and I just want to make sure we get to them all. So how are we handling the increase in domestic violence during these trying times? You know, we all know, we saw the stats, domestic violence shot up during COVID, right? How does that come up in any of the work that you folks are doing, and how are we mitigating those challenges?
I would have
And
to
now,
say,
yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
going to say for us at Youth Alive, this is one of domestic violence. When I look at it this way, this is one of those situations where really you have to focus on what you know how to do. Our not trained in how to deal with domestic violence. It is a different type of violence. Our staff has all been well trained and they know about community violence. What we did is we strengthened our partnerships with those who are that they specialize in domestic violence, and that's what we did. We strengthened those partnerships because we weren't going to have our staff walking in and trying to say, we're expert in this area too, and trying to say all violence is the same. There may be some issues that, and there were issues and underlying domestic violence issues that came to surface. But when we knew that this was domestic violence, we relied on our partners that this was their area of expertise. We just did not step in and just like, we got to tackle all violence. We stuck to what we know, which our focus has been on community violence and gun violence, and we relied heavily on our partners to really get with domestic violence, because again, it's a different type of violence, so that we did not just, because we don't know if we would have did the wrong thing, because that has not been our focus, and we didn't want to come in like we knew everything about violence.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, and I'm glad that you answered it that way, right? And it sort of goes back to one of the things JT mentioned earlier around not trying to like do everything, right? Is picking that area that you know and what you know how to do best, and then relying on partnerships to complement your work. So I think that is such a great point. I'm going to run through these quickly because I don't want to.
Let me just say one thing to that point, LaVar. Can I just say one thing really quick to that point? What Kendra said was extremely important, and also the other piece to that is that we understood, just doing community violence work, you understand certain things about violence. Like she said, when it rains, things happen inside that don't get reported because they're inside, right? So when we knew the pandemic happened, two things I knew. I knew that domestic violence would go up, and I knew that child abuse would go up, right? And so what I said was to my staff was, what we have to do is really figure out and be able to identify those things when we see them, and like you said, address it to the proper resource or get the appropriate help for that particular family or that particular young person or whatever the case is. Because the reality about domestic violence and not being an expert on all types of violence is if you don't know what you're talking about, you could cause more harm than good, right? So, we were intentional about having conversations with young people surrounding these specific things, but we were also very intentional about making sure that the correct resources were put in place to help address it. Because again, we can't bloom a million flowers. We got to do what we do, and we have to allow other partners to be able to do what they do. But identifying it, because a lot of times we have been taught or trained in our communities that, bro, that's between him and her, we don't get in that. Street codes say we don't address that type of stuff, right? Well, the street code and the man code are two different things to me. The man code says that I challenge you a little bit about it, and I try to help you get some help that's surrounding it so that it can be, because the same thing, just like the person on the street who got shot with that bullet didn't deserve to be a victim, well, maybe that young lady didn't either, or that young man didn't either, or we know that child definitely didn't deserve to be a victim. So making sure that we address those things and get the proper help, but recognizing that those things would go up during this time, I think was extremely important for us.
Let's see. Candace had a question. I keep hearing young people or youth. What are the age ranges that you're looking at here? Is violence intervention effective with adults? And that's for any of you guys.
For our program, we started years ago. When our program first started 30 years ago, we did 12 to 20. And we saw that then there was a need to expand. So at this point, on paper, we say 12 to 35, but I can honestly say that we have serviced families for gunshot victims as young as 2 and as old as 68, because there has been a need to intervene. in violent situations for older adults because they are involved. They're equally as involved. So we have provided services. I think that youth are involved, but I don't think that I don't put an age cap on change. And I don't think that there's anyone who should put an age cap on when you can implement change in someone. It's just about building that relationship and someone really wanting to get involved and make the change for themselves. It's just if you have the capacity to do so. I think that's what's more important than putting an age cap. It's the capacity to do it. And we've been successful in doing that.
We service from 15 to however old. We don't have an age limit. We started 15 though because the work that we do, we don't want a 12 or 13-year-old kid out there trying to cut grass. So we started 15 years old. But we found in our research is that the majority of our gun violence isn't committed by young people. It's committed by the older people that have been incarcerated and have finally come home and don't really understand the streets have changed. They're trying to find their way back and regain some territory or regain some clout. And the easiest way to do that is to get a body.
For us, we deal with 16 to 24-year-old young men, in Baltimore specifically young men. In our other programs in Massachusetts, we deal with young women as well, young mothers. In Baltimore, we deal with 16 to 24-year-old young men. Again, because the basis of our model is rooted in the brain science, which tells us that there's 3 points in your life where your brain is more susceptible to change: 0 to 5, 16 to 24, and a woman after she gives birth. So that's when your brain has the most elasticity. And that's when you're most likely to be able to use a cognitive behavioral intervention and really create change, because sustained behavior change takes about 2 years, a year and a half to 2 years, right? To see sustained behavior change is what we found through our program and our research, is that it's taken us about a year and a half, 2 years to see sustained behavior change. And young people who fall outside of that 16 to 24-year-old, it's not saying that it can't happen. It just takes longer. In some instances, it's really more about, it becomes almost less physiological then outside the 25-year-old range, and more, I think, to what Kendra was saying about, like, really your will. You'll want to really do it, or you'll want to really change, right? Because we do know that violence definitely happens in older categories. So we're not saying that those are the only age ranges where it happens. But for our particular model, again, being very specific and very focused on who we serve, 16 to 24-year-old men is one of the age ranges where we know that the brain has more elasticity to be able to accept the cognitive behavioral intervention and really see some sustained behavior change.
Outstanding, thank you. Next question is from Jessica, and this is a good question, right? So when it comes to Project Safe Neighborhood funding, Jessica says, PSN has a mandate to provide measurable outcomes. Outcomes from violence interruption programs can be difficult to measure for the reasons that Mr. Timpson just mentioned. Do you have any suggestions for providing measurable outcomes for grant reporting and purposes? Anyone want
One
to
of our measurements is attendance. Since we have a program, the attendance is one. If they show up every day, if they don't show up every day, have a benchmark for that. And also the number of disciplinaries, because while we don't have a zero tolerance policy, we do document every time you go against the rules and tenets of the program. It won't cause you dismissal, but it allows us to see how far you've come. And it can not only just give it to us, it allows us to convey it to the public as well.
For us at Youth Alive, I think that are important to add is looking at points of contact, because again, if you're thinking about the population that is involved in violence, building relationships, getting contact, and I think it was JT who had mentioned somebody not chasing them down, like if they're coming to you and their engagement, I think engagement, how they engage is significant. And if we're looking at recidivism, those type of things, because I've worked with young men who went to school, like he wasn't going to school at all. And I remember going to court and advocating for these young men. It's like, but hold on, I got them to go to school for 2 days in a week. So, I mean, that's significant progress. It might not mean anything to someone else, but if we're thinking about this population, out of 5 days, he went twice. That's significant progress. I mean, it's going to take some time. So I think that starting off with those small things, that you have to really look at what we're talking about here. Even if you're talking about how they contact you, even if you can get parent engagement, because sometimes if you're dealing with younger population, the parent is the one who's not even participating either. So that is also something that's measurable if you have a parent engagement. But they're getting involved in jobs or even thinking about jobs, working on a resume. And it may just be putting together a resume of their skill set without a job, just things they know how to do. They're just starting off really small, or someone on probation who hasn't had a violation in a whole year. Those type of things, because again, the type of activities that this population is involved in, you have to start so small. And what I always find myself doing is talking to funders who are not really in tune with exactly what's going on with this population when we talk about measurable outcomes. Because again, when we're talking about school, home environment, things like that, sometimes they're just not on the same page and don't understand what's really happening in some of these communities.
Yeah, I think recidivism is one of the ones that we look at, like a reduction in recidivism. But let me caution that by saying, I don't mean that they don't actually go back to jail. What I look at is what they went back for. So if you went for murder the first time and this time you went for a bag of weed or a simple assault, then I still don't like it, but that's better than what you went for the first time, right? And that signals some type of behavior change. Because think about this. What if it was the exact same situation that you murdered somebody for before, but this time you might have had enough agency and they pushed you long enough where you might have just smacked them and you went to jail, right? Okay, yeah, you shouldn't have done that. But I can live with that because you didn't take somebody's life this time, right? The other thing that Kendra just mentioned was about funders not really understanding or having realistic expectations around the work. Because you funded me for 6 months, you expect me to produce all these glorious results over somebody who's been traumatized for 30 years, or 16 years, or 18 years, or however long, right? I can't promise you anything from somebody who's been traumatized for that long in their life, right? These long-term problems don't have short-term solutions. And if we keep putting pressure on people to produce short-term solutions, then you're going to get corners cut. And then you're going to blame the program for cutting corners and all this different stuff when you put unrealistic expectations on them to begin with. Give people time to really affect change. Again, 6 months, 12 months, that's great for somebody who's ready for that. But when you're talking about the group of young people that are at the center of urban violence, it will take time for them to change. And as long as you can help funders understand that piece first, like, look, this is going to take time, right? And if you're expecting me to do this in 6 months, you can keep your money. Because I'm not going to disservice my community for your 6 months of money. Now, you can keep it, right? Because I'd rather do the work organically. I'd rather grind. I'd rather do whatever I got to do, honestly, to really be able to affect change for these young people than to be able to check a box. Because checking a box keeps murders up in our communities. That's what checking boxes does. So we never want to be in the work of checking boxes. What we want to be in the work of is authentically offering services to these young people at the center of urban violence. Now, not saying that there shouldn't be checks and balances in place. There always should be. But can we come to the table and have a realistic conversation about what those look like, right? And how long they actually take. Now, I know for all the funding streams aren't long-term. I get it. There are restrictions and caps and all these different things. I understand all of that. But what I'm saying is that maybe that's where you as a program need to step out the way and help another program who's in that position take that 6 months of funding and do something great with what they can do with it, as opposed to chasing the money and disservicing the community, right? So we have a responsibility as providers to understand what our limits are, what we can really realistically do. And we also have a responsibility to help funders understand that and what that looks like and the reality behind the situation. Again, it's not a comfortable conversation. It should piss people off because that's reality. Murder pisses me off. So when I'm talking about my community being the way that it's been and it pisses me off, Well, when you come to me with realistic expectations about serving my community, which you probably know nothing about, then my job is to wake you up and help you understand what it actually looks like and the reality that happens behind all these different things. So the challenges are there, and I don't know what the benchmarks would necessarily be, but I know we look for some level of sustained employment, right? And again, sustainability could be whatever you define it, 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever. But I don't expect a young person to go from where I got them from to be able to keep a job for 2 years and 6 months. Maybe after 4 years, they might be able to keep a job. We're a 4-year model. So we're designed to work with these young people for 4 years. So at the end of that 4 years, yeah, my expectations for these young people are a lot higher than they were the first year or the first couple months or whatever the case is. But we're giving them a long enough runway to really be able to affect some change.
Thank you so much. Real quick, because we have a limited amount of time, and I need to throw it over to Brandy in about 5 minutes to wrap up. But here's another question in the chat. As always, any of you feel free to take this. Here in DC, some individuals and pastors have put together a new community code to try to change the community attitudes like you've been talking about. What other ways have you found and would you suggest for individuals to contribute to that change in attitude and culture? And and I'm sorry if we already covered this, which we have not. We talked about it a little bit, but we haven't covered it. Feel free to take that, anyone who wants to.
I'm trying to reread the question. I'm just trying to understand it again.
Yeah, so let me read it one more time. Here in DC, some individuals and pastors have put together new community codes to try to change community attitudes, like you've been talking about, like we've discussed earlier, right? Changing attitudes, changing culture. What other ways have you found and would you suggest for individuals to contribute to that change in attitudes and cultures?
So I would say, well, I just speak from a personal point of view for that. Like, for me, I have to understand, I have to continuously work on changing myself, right? To understand how I can continuously help affect community. And I think that community sometimes has a hard time understanding kind of realities around them. And that creates a certain misconception about the young people in the community or a certain perception about them, whatever the case is. But what I would say is that I do think that we do have to change the way that community thinks about each other in terms of like getting involved and the things that we do to support each other, as opposed to the things that we do to kind of keep each other siloed and kind of work against each other. What we have to understand is that the larger ecosystem around community and systems and all that type of stuff has to kind of figure that way to tie in together. And what I mean by that is people have to understand things like, for instance, the street code, right? Of what a snitch is, right? What I'm saying is that if you standing on that lady's steps selling drugs and she call up and she come to you and asks you not to do it, or she's too afraid to ask you not to do it, so she calls the police, she not a snitch, bro. She got every right to ask you not to do that in front of her house, right? Because she got grandsons and grandkids that she probably doesn't even want exposed to that. That's one. Then two, there's the other piece to it where it's like, your grandkids is out there doing the same thing that you ostracizing everybody else for, right? So are you saying anything to them? Are you having conversations with them? Are you addressing that? Like, I'm very careful about this question because never will I criticize community, because that happens enough. But I think that it's kind of a complex question for me to really answer. I just think that we have to figure out the ways in which we support each other in community that really help affect change. And I think that those things may look different where you are. So I don't think it's a blanket answer to that. I think the Reverend knows what's best for his community. I think Kendra knows what's best for her community. And I think you guys probably know what's best for your community. The ones who are watching know what's best for your community to kind of affect change. But follow your instincts. That's the best I could say. If you feel like the reverends or those pastors or those clergy are doing the right thing, to figure out how to support it.
I'm sorry, LeVar, could you ask the question one more time? I was on another meeting.
No worries. The question was just about, so I'll paraphrase, just about changing community attitudes, changing the culture within communities. What are some innovative ways that you folks have seen work to change cultural, norms within communities or attitudes within communities?
Gotcha. I believe my brother just finished saying, talking about the preachers. One of the things I do believe that we do that's a little backwards is we assume that most of our preachers are still the leaders in our communities, and that has kind of shifted. And when I see this, it's shifted. It's going to take. That no longer works. It's going to take you finding people that are in the community every day doing work, either at the schools, at the community center, people that may work at McDonald's, those people that know the community, the barbers in the barbershop, people that work at the local gas station. Those are the people that have a pulse for the neighborhood. The preachers generally drive in the neighborhood and go home. They have no clue what's happening in the neighborhood. So to ask them, and they only open on Sunday. So to think that they can help actually affect change in this way, to me, is asinine. I'm a pastor. I completely understand. And when I go to a room and there's a lot of us in there, I already know what's going to be. One of the things that makes me a little different, though, is that it's funny, I'm not referred to as a pastor in the neighborhood. I'm referred to as Mr. Brown. Because while I do preach on Sunday, I'm at work in the neighborhood every day of the week.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to add, is the consistency. You can't keep bringing new people to the table and continue to influence what's going on. I think that if you're going to continue to do this, then if something isn't working, okay, if you don't have new people that are coming, hear what's already tried before you have somebody else continue to reinvent the wheel or to do things that are just not productive to your community. You know your community, you know what's needed. So I think that there has to be some consistency, because if you're steady changing what's happening in the community, that's what the community is seeing, steady change and inconsistency. So if you're trying to bring stability and bring about change in the community and bring a certain culture, then those who are trying to do that need to be on one page first before you're trying to put that out there to the community, because then what you're bringing is what you're going to be putting out there. And if it's inconsistency, uncertainty, and people not working together, the community reads that, they pick up on that, and I feel like you start losing your community efforts.
Amazing. Thank you, folks, so much for your thoughts, for, I knew this was going to be a wonderful conversation, just, knowing the folks who we had lined up today. But thank you so much for participating. I'm going to throw it back to Brandy. I will say there may have been one or two questions we weren't able to get to. I'm going to put my email address in the chat. Feel free to reach out, and I'll be more than happy to connect you to the panelists. Thank you, folks, again.
Yeah, what a great discussion, and thanks so much to Pastor Brown, JT, Kendra, and LeVar. This was a fantastic discussion, and I want to make sure that we also provide you with, I'm going to put it in the link now. This is going to be the link for training and technical assistance. All right, so there it is in the link. If you are interested in training and technical assistance, which can be done through the BJA's National Training and Technical Assistance Center, please make sure to submit a request as well, because I think that if this is an effort that you're really interested in, these speakers just sort of touch the surface, right? And when they get into the nuances of how to and the very specific details of what their policies and programs look like, that's going to require some training and technical assistance. And so I just want to make a point to be sure to make a request for training and technical assistance. We'd also would just ask that you fill out the evaluation for this particular session. We want to know how we've done. This is the final session on community-based violence intervention. I think we ended on a great note here, so we're just really grateful to LISC and BJA for their assistance. it's been a fantastic opportunity to work with you. So thanks again to the panelists, and thank you, Kendra, for joining at the last minute, and thank you, JT, for joining on vacation. And congratulations, Pastor Brown, on your newest assignment. So thanks again, everyone.
Welcome.